All right, looks like we are live, and I want to welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie, and I am your host and moderator for this much anticipated debate between David McQueen and Reid on the question: is there scientific evidence for young Earth creation? These gentlemen, both Mark and David, are no strangers to debates, nor are they strangers to the Standing for Truth debate platform. They are both very professional and always come in with great points and arguments for these debates. And so I'm pumped to see what our guests tonight are going to bring to the table. Why don't we get acquainted before we get into the opening statements, kind of break the ice a little bit? David, why don't we start with you? Been a little while since you've been here, and so it's great to have you back. I hope you've been well, David. So for the audience, how have you been? A little bit about yourself.
Been doing well. I promised Brother Mark a bit of humor, and so we want to start with our Batman theme here. And notice I've even got a Batman blanket now that I can cover my board with. And so I have had fun getting everything ready for tonight and been doing well. Mark, I want to thank you for your time for this debate tonight. And I've been anticipating some of your criticism.
Well, that's a cool way to unveil your background or your drawing board there with your arguments, David. So tonight I can refer to you as Bruce Wayne if you'd like to, rather than David McQueen. So I appreciate the Batman references. Always cool, big fan. So David, thank you for the intro. Mark Reid, good to have you back as well. You have a busy summer of debates, and I appreciate that because we both share that in common. We love debates. We appreciate these exchanges. So great to have you. How have you been? And also a little bit about you and your channel.
Yeah, great to be here, Tony. Thank you so much. I've got a lot of things coming up. I've got a lot of interviews coming up, which is fantastic. I love having discussions as well as debates. But, you know, as you say, I love debates. So, yeah, thank you for having me on. And thanks, everybody, for watching. And thanks to David for being here. Really good to see you. I've got a few things coming up. I've just launched a gaming channel. I've just sort of started on that, and I've got, as I said, lots of discussions coming up with all kinds of people, you know, sort of Islamic people and Christians and things, which should be fantastic, sort of just you know, without the debating, just a good intellectual discussion between people, you know, sit down, calm and wonderful. So if you do like discussions about theology and philosophy, morality and science, you know, I do have discussions with flat earthers as well. So, and debates against flat earthers. So, anything sort of debating on science and theology, I'm doing that. So, but it's fantastic to be here, and it's great to see you, Donnie.
Great to see you as well, Mark. I appreciate the introduction. And I think that's very important what you're doing. It's what I do here as well. Get people of differing views, different worldviews and opinions, and just have some sophisticated discussions. So if anybody wants to see more from Mark and also see the upcoming shows he has, do check the description box for a link to his YouTube channel. Also, congratulations on your gaming channel as well, Mark. Very cool.
Thank you.
And for David, his channel is basically here. So if you want to see more from David, check the description box as well. And there should be a link to several of his past programs as well. Okay, quick reminder. We do have a heavy week of shows, about 5 shows. Last week we had 5 shows as well. So we're trying to give you lots of content and lots of debates on a good diversity of topics. So I'm looking forward to tonight's debate, of course, on young Earth creation. Excited for this one. Tomorrow, I'm excited to have Grayson and Robertson Jenis here for the great geocentrism debate. And Mark Reid will be back here as well, coming up at the end of June for a debate with Matt on is there scientific evidence for evolution. So lots to look forward to. All right, let me go over the format for tonight's debate on young Earth creation. And so we are going to be having 12-minute opening statement. David, being the affirmative, will kick us off with his opening statement. Then we'll have an 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal, followed by a 5-minute break. I'll go over some reminders and announcements during that time. And then we'll have a 40-minute free-flowing discussion on the topic. Then we'll have 5-minute closing statements to wrap up our thoughts and points. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We will be having a roughly 25-minute audience Q&A period. And so if you have a question, please make sure to tag me. And also just let me know who the question is for. For David, let me know. If it's for Mark, let me know as well. So with that, David, we're going to hand it over to you. And whenever you're ready, you've got 12 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning at the 11-minute mark.
Thank you. I'll need that.
Wind things down.
Thank you so much.
Floor is yours.
For those of you that may be new to the channel, I am a professionally trained geologist. Next year, I'll celebrate my 50th year as a geologist. And as you're about to find out, as I present these arguments, one of my main areas of argument against Mark tonight is the issue of, let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Okay, now, so we'll begin now with the arguments. Again, I am arguing that the Earth is young, and I worry about Mark Reid in the sense that my opponent has not been in the majority over the centuries. If you go back historically, the majority opinion has been, except for the last 300 or so years, that the Earth is around 6,000 years old. And so this minority view that you're going to argue, Mark, troubles me because over my academic life, my undergraduate at Tennessee, my master's from the University of Michigan, I've enjoyed arguing not only that the Earth is young, but also the Bishop Usher date of 4004 BC. I'm imagining that Mark would expect me to begin with the Bible, and we will come to the Bible. But go ahead and everybody get your copy of the Quran out and turn to Shura. And I have to get used to this because since it's in Arabic, I've got to open it this way, opposite from what I'm used to. And so let me begin reading with Shura 1:2. Now, for many of you that don't read the Quran as I do, you may not know that Shura is kind of like, if you will, the chapter, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. So Shura, number 1, is the beginning of the Quran. And let me begin reading with the Islamic equivalent of Genesis 1:1, which is Shura 1:1. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise and thanks are Allah's, the Lord of all mankind, jinn, and all that exists. And then jumping down to verse 6 of Shura 1, the encouragement is to guide us on the straight way. Well, I feel that Mark is not on the straight path when it comes to understanding this whole issue of the young Earth. I worked from 1983 to 1987 full-time for Dr. Henry Morris, who passed away several years ago. And one of the things that Dr. Morris would routinely compliment Orthodox Judaism and Islam about is that they were religions, along with Christianity, that recognized that the earth was young. And so when we break down the vocabulary here from the Quran, let me read some things here that will be important. When it says, all praise and thanks are Allah's, the Lord of mankind and so forth, in the Quran, that word is the word Rabb, and R-A-B-B, that you'll see there on my chart. And that word is of interest because this is how Rabb is explained in the notes in my copy of the Quran. And it reads this way. Rabb has no proper equivalent in the English language. It means the one and only Lord of all the universe, its creator. And so here we have followers of Islam recognizing that we have a creator in God. And in the introduction to my copy, it says this. It comments about how Abu Hura is the narrator. And he said, both in this world and in the hereafter, I am the nearest of all the people to Isa, which is Jesus in Arabic, and the son of Miriam, or Mary. Our oldest daughter's name is Miriam, the Hebrew equivalent of this Arabic word. The prophets are paternal brothers. Their mothers are different, but their religion is one. And he refers to Islamic monotheism. Well, I, of course, understand that the Quran was written after the time of Jesus. And so a lot of the references in the Quran are essentially copies, or I would, as a Christian, view it as stolen from the Gospels and so forth. The more authoritative text in my book is the Bible. And so here is a Bible that I don't ordinarily use because it's called the New Living Translation. But it's not so bad when we come to the authoritative part of Genesis 5, 1 through 5, which I will argue is the chronology. Mark, keep in mind that I'm arguing that the Bible is a trustworthy historical document. And so when it says in Genesis chapter 5, this is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. He created them male and female. He blessed them and called them human. When Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him, his very image, named Seth. And after the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years. He had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. Now, this is what the Bible calls a chronology. And so my first argument is a biblical argument that for most of the last, for most of history, a young earth view has been the one that's been put forward as the most accurate. So that's the historical argument. Now let's move to three scientific arguments that I want to challenge Mark with. I want to go over Gentry's peer-reviewed data regarding what are called radioactive halos. I had the privilege of working for Bob Gentry back in my undergraduate days in the early 70s at Oak Ridge National Labs. And the particular paper that I'm going to reference during our debate is the 1974 paper where Gentry discusses in some detail the decay theory, d lambda over lambda, and how it relates to the radius of the radioactive halos. So that will be one of the arguments. The next argument that I want to challenge Mark on is Tom Barnes' data regarding the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. I worked for Tom Barnes at the Institute for Creation Research, 1983. He was the dean of the graduate school. And he and I spoke about this a bunch during that time. The most straightforward interpretation of the decay of the Earth's magnetic field shows that the field was at its maximum strength about 10,000 years ago. Now, both Barnes and I dismiss the idea of a field recharge as some sort of rescue device to explain how the magnetic field can be very high, drop to zero, high, zero. That contradicts the Maxwell equations. And then my final argument for tonight is that the old Earth is useless to a professional geologist like me. And notice my argument here. It's useless in petroleum geology. It's useless in mining. And it's useless in geology in general. Whether we're talking about the rock mechanics of folding, the origin of coal. Mark, I wanted you to know that I was trained both in Michigan and also in my University of Tennessee days as an economic geologist. Copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver. And so I'm going to present an argument that whether we're dealing with the folding of rocks, the origin of coal.
1 minute.
Or the origin of copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver deposits, I'm going to present the argument that an old Earth is useless in this profession of mine. And let me give one example. At the University of Michigan, as it slowly came out that I was a young Earth creationist, you can imagine that my professors would not allow me to enter the PhD program because I had a dissenting point of view that they considered to be old-fashioned. But in the process of talking with my professors, I only found one example dealing with a porphyry copper deposit in the western United States where there seemed to be some argument that radiometric dating could have helped the exploration geologists find this.
10 seconds.
I consider that to be an anomaly. Thank you, Donnie.
David, thank you very much for that 12-minute opening statement. We're now going to hand it over to Mark Reid. Mark, whenever you're ready, just let me know, and I can share your slides as well. And you have...
Fantastic.
And Mark, I've got my notebook ready to take notes on what you're teaching me.
Awesome. No worries at all. I want that one. Yep. Beautiful.
And Mark, before you start, I'll let the audience know, yes, I've seen the questions come in, everybody already, some great questions. I'm all caught up, so I do appreciate that. And Mark, the slides are up on the screen for you. So whenever you're ready, just let me know. I'll start your timer.
Fantastic. The question today is there scientific evidence for creationism? So let's get to it and let's get this down. So creationism, first we got to define what it is. Basically, it's a belief in the transcendent God, created universe ex nihilo out of nothing through supernatural means. Now I know David here is a Christian, but there can be many forms of creationism. There's Muslim, Hindi creationism, even Wiccan and pagan creationism exists, which as far as I'm concerned, all have the same level of scientific evidence behind them, which is none whatsoever. And I will explain why. So first off, let's see, what is science? We have to pin down what it is, or it is methodological naturalism. There is a criterion that must be followed for a field or area to fit the label of science. Creationism does not follow this procedure and does not falsify, test, or have any kind of scientific reporting mechanism in which to justify their beliefs as scientific. What is worse is that multiple different creationists all claim to have the answer, yet they believe different gods and different answers, making them contradictory. Creation science falls under the description of pseudoscience, which has been shown many times over the course last century, and we will get into that. So scientific evidence should support or counter their hypothesis. In this case, the hypothesis is God created the universe. Any evidence that does not support God created the universe or counters God created the universe is not evidence one way or another for a God. It may be evidence related to another hypothesis, but not to the God one, and hence I'll only be accepting evidence for a God, not any other subject or topic. So in science, the null hypothesis is the default, and it's the opposite of the thing you want to demonstrate. So if I wanted to demonstrate that a new drug works, I'd try to compare it against a control group and say, if the drug doesn't work, there should be no difference between the control who had a placebo and the real one. Another way to say it perhaps is, if you think somebody committed a crime, then you would check their alibi and make sure you find out where they were, trying to clear them. With each failure to clear them, making you more and more certain that they did it. And that's how a null hypothesis, and it's how science should be conducted. So good evidence for creationism would have a better track record on testable predictions. They should be able to form these predictions and for them to work better than the conventional system. I give the example of an oil company called Zion Oil and Gas in Israel. They were founded by a creationist, biblical Zionist in Israel circa the year 2000, and they use biblical models for their oil finding. And found almost no oil. There's been so little commercial success that in 2011 they resorted to contracting a seismic survey with the Geophysical Institute of Israel. This is emblematic of a company using pseudoscience and having to fall back on real science when it inevitably fails. So far, I've covered the first two of these sort of what is evidence for creationism. I want to focus on the third. Anybody can see a phenomenon and say, well, this is what caused it, and come up with a post hoc sort of ad hoc explanation. Looking at a hole in the ground, you can say moles did it, but does that make it true? The whole point of science is that we want to make novel, testable predictions that we do not know the answer to, so we can confirm the explanation. An explanation that accounts for something is not evidence for it. It is merely an ad hoc explanation. So these are all the court cases where creationism is shown not to be a science. Overwhelmingly, the courts have ruled that creationism is inextricably linked to religion. The cases have also affirmed unequivocally that creationism is not science. I want to focus on the McQueen versus Arkansas, and sort of Professor McQueen mentioned someone that was there, as it set the precedent for what constitutes science and what does not. This is what Judge Overton ruled, the essential characteristics of science. I think that most scientists would actually stand by this. Creationism fails not on one, not on two, but on all 5 counts of this. With creationism, we're given on-the-spot ad hoc hypotheses as soon as any of its claims are challenged. These hypotheses are not falsifiable and usually not able to be tested in any way. This is not good enough for scientific evidence. So a bit of logic for you. It's early in the morning, but let's go anyway. Logic, and this is a dichotomy that I'm presenting. It's 2 choices on which every possible option falls into one prong or leg of the choice. All of these are true dichotomies. Logically, there can be no other option than dog or not dog, or God or not God. Those are exclusive. What's a false dichotomy? It looks like, when a false dichotomy is one where it looks like there's no other option at first glance, but we see some things don't fall into either leg or prong of the argument. So to say either the universe was natural or God, you miss out on all the other supernatural things that could cause the universe. We are proving things logically. All I have to do to prove a dichotomy is false is provide anything that does not fall into one of these prongs. So I give you the Blarney Stone, a non-intelligent magic rock that created the universe. Now, I'm not saying this did this, but if you think about it logically, it's not God and it's not natural. So it shows the natural cause God dichotomy is a false dichotomy. Now, I'm not trying to be mean or make fun of religion, and bear with me here. What I'm trying to get across is that if you somehow demonstrate that a naturalistic explanation for the universe are wrong or fall short, it does not get you to a God. If you're using a dichotomy to say, well, if we disprove naturalism, it must be a God, you need to eliminate every single other possibility for that to be true. Now, what you can do is provide evidence for a God creating the universe and not against any other explanation. The problem is we never get evidence for a God, only claims that it wasn't natural, which isn't good enough to prove a God. Take my hole, for example. If you rule out underground moles, can you then blame your neighbor based on ruling one option out? No, of course not. It could be natural. It could be some other person. You need evidence for it being your neighbor, not against anything else. So I wanted to touch on this. It's related to the ad hoc explanations, and we sort of get it from creationists a lot. It shows problems with critical thinking, and you can get into it if you don't think about the structure of thought. And I want to use the one that's sort of me. If someone lives in Sydney, then they live in Australia. Mark lives in Australia, therefore Mark lives in Sydney. This is where things can get you into trouble. If you're assuming that God exists because trees exist, that can get you into a lot of trouble. And it is a logical fallacy. It doesn't mean you're incorrect about God, but it isn't good evidence. So I'll bring up some problems science has with the biblical account, because I know that Professor McQueen sort of is biblical. Some religions will have problems with these, some won't. Some, like Islam, has other creationist problems, like, I don't know, splitting the moon in half, for instance, has a problem. The order of creation, something out of nothing. The Adam and Eve story, talking serpents, these kind of things are not emblematic of scientific evidence. They're emblematic of stories. And you can believe it, sure, you can believe it on a story, but it's not scientific evidence. So I want to pose these questions to Professor McLean and get some kind of response before the debate is out. What would falsify creationism? How can we test the validity of creationism? And what experiments can be performed to replicate the creationist claims? Okay, so I'd like to be able to pose those three questions and get answers for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your opening statement. Gentlemen, that concludes the opening statements for tonight's debate. We're now moving into the rebuttal portion of the debate. And for the rebuttals, we have 8 minutes. And so, David, we're going to hand the floor back to you. Whenever you're ready, you've got 8 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your comments, and let's begin to go down the list to show where you are incorrect. It is certainly true that in statistics, we want to look at what would be called the null hypothesis. And we would like some way to be able to falsify a null hypothesis and get past that into a hypothesis that does actually work. I think, Mark, you're incorrect in saying that everything we deal with in creationism is from an ad hoc point of view. And let me use Gentry's work as a starting point to critique your ad hoc part of things. And since I was part of the pre-trial testimony for the Arkansas Creation Evolution trial that you referred to, I want to make sure that I cover that also. But let's begin with Gentry's work in the article in the peer-reviewed journal of science. You can find the article by a Google search. I was working for Gentry as a lab assistant during the time of 1974 when this was published. And the rebuttal to what Mark has said is found in reference 16. This is page 243. and it's based around alpha decay theory. Gentry did propose 2 hypotheses, and then he looked at the diameters of the radioactive halos to provide an argument for them. Now, let's keep in mind what a halo is. In a mica or a fluorite mineral, there is often found a zone that's got a zircon in it. ZIRCON, zircon. And that zircon has zirconium in it for sure, but there's room in there for also uranium, thorium, and most importantly, polonium. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying plutonium. I'm saying polonium. And so Gentry did propose in this paper 2 points of view. He said, let's look at the diameter of this halo. I'll use another color here. And let's measure the diameter of that. And what he had me do when I worked as his lab assistant is I would use a grit to get a true diametral section. You had to get right down where you were looking at the true diameter of the halo. Now, as a geologist, why is this important? When I looked this up, both undergraduate and also pursued it at Michigan in my graduate work, what is the justification that radioactive decay has been constant through time? Well, the geologists call these things pleochroic halos. Gentry calls them radio halos. And these diameters in the analysis that was done pre-World War II seem to be pretty constant. And so the argument was that this provides an evidence for the constancy of radioactive decay. Well, Gentry looked at that. And if you look at the calculus mark of d lambda over lambda, you find that this equation is true, that the dr over r, which is the radius there, plus the dr over r, which deals with a quantum physics parameter, gives you a value of 1.4. Now, this is under evolutionary assumptions. This is assuming that you have a constant decay rate and so forth. Well, even if you give the evolutionary community that hypothesis, it turns out that this differential equation comes out to 1.4, which means that there's at least an error of 35% in uranium-238 dating. Now, let's go to the other hypothesis. You've challenged me to present a multiple working hypothesis, and so here it is. If you use the same data and you use creationist assumptions of a what Gentry called a primordial beginning of the Earth, there's simply no proof that lambda is constant. And so that's the point of view that I've taken over the years and argued when it comes to the matter of radioactive halos. So my counter argument to you, Mark, is that Gentry did indeed propose 2 hypotheses, and in the sense of the 1974 paper, they were not ad hoc. They were based on measurements that I saw him made with the electron microprobe and so forth. But now let's go on to the 1982 McQueen v. Arkansas. And there's a detail that Mark left out that is important. I was a professor at Virginia State University, which is south of Richmond, Virginia, in Petersburg, Virginia. And I was a professor of geology there.
1 minute.
I was contacted by the state of Arkansas to be part of this both the pretrial testimony and also the 1982 argument. It turns out that this judge in Arkansas that Mark quotes dismissed all the junior scientists and only had a few senior scientists present. And it turns out that the judge in the case had judicial bias. Why? His mom was an Arkansas high school biology teacher who had been chewed upon by creationists all of her career. And so he had no interest in the truth.
10 seconds.
He had no interest in any kind of falsification. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for that 8-minute rebuttal. We're now going to hand it over to Mark Reid. Mark, whenever you're ready, you also have 8 minutes, and the floor is yours. Go ahead.
So the first thing was that Dave worries about me. I kind of worry about sort of the logical sort of basis of how you think. I mean, the first thing you brought up is an argument from popularity that, hey, that all these years we thought one thing and then found out we were wrong. If you took that same argument to other fields of inquiry, then we should go back to using, ancient medicines and things like that. I think that the idea that, hey, we should look back and see what we were doing that was right is good. But the whole idea that because the majority of people ages ago believed something doesn't make it true. And sort of it brought up the Quran. And I think the Quran, like most Abrahamic religion or all of Abrahamic religion, sort of do think the Old Testament is correct. So I'm not sure how that. And the Quran isn't a scientific book. That's the thing. It has that you mentioned jinn in there. And the Quran says that the stars are lamps thrown at jinn to scare them away. So that's not exactly a scientific statement. I don't know why sort of any religious books being brought into it at all, because they're certainly not science books. You said that Christianity and Judaism are religions, and I agree, they are religions. They're not science. So you sort of said that right at the start. This whole idea that Rab means the one and only Lord, it's not sort of surprising, considering that Islam is an Abrahamic religion, but that's not a scientific book. You can believe it based upon, your reading of the Quran. I've got no problem with that. And you can say maybe it's evidence. I think it's pretty weak evidence, but you can say it's evidence. What it isn't is scientific evidence, and that's really what we're talking about. The Bible is not a scientific book either. There's multiple things in the Bible that aren't scientific. It's untested, untestable, and it's unable to be falsified, which means that it is not a science book. So, you said it was a trustworthy historical document. Well, that's another debate entirely. It can be a trustworthy historical document. I could concede that. I probably, in another debate, I might argue it. But, I could concede that this debate, and it doesn't equal a scientific book. So I'm wondering why if we have a trusted sort of historical document from Alexander the Great, does that make it a scientific document? No, it doesn't. It just means that it's a historical document. And you can believe it off that, sure, but it doesn't make it scientific evidence. And this chronology needs to be falsifiable, testable, and in fact tested to be true. You sort of mentioned very briefly the recharge device of Maxwell's equation. Well, I'm really sorry. Even if you prove that false, it doesn't get you to a God. You've got to get evidence for the God, not against any other claim being made. And at the moment, you sort of have no scientific evidence for the God. All you're doing is expressing things against other stuff. The Old Earth has a professional geologist. I've already pointed out that the Zion Company had to employ a modern geological survey when they tried to use the Bible to find oil, failed catastrophically. You mentioned sort of coal. You don't need Old Earth for coal, copper, zinc, lead. It's irrelevant. The point is creationism scientific? It doesn't matter if Old Earth is scientific or not. That's not the question. The question is creationism. Is that scientific? So I just want to point out here that you attacking things in mainstream geology and in mainstream science doesn't get you to creationism being scientific. You need to provide scientific evidence for creationism, not against anything else, as I've pointed out multiple times. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that rebuttal. Gentlemen, that concludes the opening statements and rebuttals so far for this debate. Before we get into the open discussion, we will have a 5-minute break. During the 5-minute break, I will go over some reminders and announcements. And so, David, if you're ready.
Yeah, I am looking forward to have 5 minutes to think about my critique of Mark. If you'll drop my video, I'll go get something hot to drink.
Okay, here we go.
We are. Thanks, Sonny.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so what I'll do for this 5-minute break is just go over some reminders and announcements. We have a lot going on here at Standing for Truth. And so tomorrow, as I pointed out earlier, we do have our first geocentrism debate. So this should be fun. Dr. Robert Sungenis, leading voice in the geocentrism debate world, and Grayson, who's also done quite a bit of study on this topic too. So I'm looking forward to this one. This one will be tomorrow at 7 EST. Then this weekend, a lot of people looking forward to this. So my goal has been to give you a good variety, a nice variety of topics. And so if you're not yet subscribed, you love debates, especially debates on soteriology, the nature of God, science, the creation versus evolution topics, including young earth creation and the flood, make sure to hit that subscribe button and also share this content around, because it is a way for us to engage these important topics, get out of our theological and scientific echo chambers, and just allow those of differing views to debate and discuss these important topics. So this one's coming up on Saturday. Soteriology Showdown. Can Christians fall away or turn from the faith completely in this earthly life, temporal life? Kelly Powers and Charles Jennings, both excellent debaters, always come in well prepped and equipped to debate. Kelly will be back here as well after this debate. He'll be debating Carlos Xavier. And so I'm looking forward to this one. Does Matthew 28:19 teach the Trinity is biblical? Kelly Powers is in the affirmative, Carlos in the negative. Both of these gentlemen, fantastic debaters. They're both well known in the world of nature of God debate. So I'm looking forward to hosting this one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Paul Price from Uncensored Pilgrims. Good to see you in the chat, my brother. He engaged in a discussion, evidence for God discussion last week with Michael, the Canadian atheist. That was an excellent discussion. I really enjoyed that. So if you haven't yet seen it, please do check it out. I highly recommend it. So we'll be having the same discussion, except this time with Grayson from the Base Theory YouTube channel. And so is there evidence for the existence of God? Paul Price and Grayson. Paul Price and Mark Reid had a really, really good formal debate on the God topic going on about a couple months now. And so I'd recommend checking that out too. I see questions coming in, so I appreciate that. I will be saving those for the audience Q&A. We've got some main events coming at you for the summer. And so here we have Charles Jennings again from the Layman Seminary. He's going to be debating Seraphim Hamilton. And so this is going to be a big debate on salvation. So is salvation or justification, is justification by faith alone? Again, Charles versus Cabane. This will be in August, and I'm pumped for this one. There's a few other soteriology related debates that I am just confirming final details on, and so I am hoping to confirm those shortly in order to get them into the summer. because I want to make this the summer of debates. I want to try to top last summer, as last summer we had some really, really good debates. Okay, we've got some eschatology as well for everybody. So is full preterism biblical? Pastor Scott Clem, Stacy Turbeville. This is coming up in July. Pastor Scott Clem and Merritt from the Crimson Air YouTube channel, they will also be debating in July. They will be debating the topic of Daniel's 70th week, one of my favorite topics. So looking forward to that one. We've also got the epic rematch between David Preston and Pastor Matt First. This is the great dispensationalism debate. Is God done with Israel? So controversial topic, and lots of different views, lots of opinions, mixed opinions, put it that way, in the world of Christianity on this topic. So this is coming up for everybody in August. So definitely mark this one on your calendar. Pastor Anthony Aquino and Dr. Don Preston, they'll be debating in September, as a matter of fact. And so Dr. Don Preston is a leading voice in the world of preterism. And so he's going to be debating Pastor Anthony Aquino. This is the great millennium debate. Is the 1,000 years future? And so I'll just keep doing this until I see Professor David McQueen in the backstage. So the 5 minutes is up, but I don't see David yet. So once David gets back, we will get into our discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. So Mark Reid is going to be back as well. He's busy this summer. So Mark was here a couple of weeks ago. He debated T-Rock on young earth creation, or the global flood. Sorry, that was a great debate, comprehensive debate, went about 3 hours. And so if you're looking for a solid debate on the flood, you get a good idea on both sides of the equation there, please do check it out. We've done a lot of debates on the flood. So this one's coming up. Mark Reid and Matt Naylor from Team Standing for Truth. Matt and Grayson debated last week. They debated the topic of the age of the earth as well, but with a very specific focus on the topic of radiometric dating. And so I think currently available, that was probably, or is probably, the most comprehensive debate on the topic of radiometric dating. So Matt and Grayson both did a great job in that debate. Lots of good points and arguments discussed. So if you haven't yet seen that one, do check it out. This one's going to be fun as well. Matt and Mark, is there scientific evidence for evolution? So we got a solid mix of debates on evolution, young earth creation, the topic of ancestry, of course, and looking at the upcoming live stream section on the channel, we've had to reschedule several times the Dragons debate showdown between Howard and Taylor. So I have been in contact through email with Taylor and Howard. Because of Howard's time zone, it's just made it difficult to nail down a time that also works for Taylor because of his work schedule. Typically, we don't do debates on Sundays, but I did get word from both of them that we are good for a Sunday in July. And so we are going to be rescheduling that one in July, and it's going to happen. So I know a lot of people are looking forward to that one. And so we are still good to go on that one for those wondering. On the 26th, we've got the great limited atonement debate. That is going to be between Scott Anoski and Dan Chapa. Dan Chapa is also going to be back here in July. So he's going to be here in July and June. July, he's going to be debating Matt Slick. And rather than a formal debate, it's going to be more informal. So it's going to be a discussion on limited atonement. The great Calvinism discussion, you could say. And here we go, David McQueen. Great to have you back. I was running out of things to talk about, so
I hope you're. It took me a minute to find the different counter arguments to what Mark is saying, so I apologize. Ready to go, Tony? How do you want to handle this?
Okay, gentlemen, so we're going to do between a 30 and a 40-minute open discussion. since Mark just ended with his rebuttal, why don't we allow you, David McQueen? Now, what I'm going to do in this discussion, just to make sure that we have enough time to ask the relevant questions to engage all the specific points, is we'll do equal time, but I'll make sure that no debater goes over 2 minutes in a response. And then that way we'll keep it as free flowing as possible. So David, let's allow you to pick the first topic or point, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth on that for a little while. Gentlemen, go ahead.
Okay, Mark, I want to make it clear. I referenced the Quran. I don't defend it. I don't view it as a historical document in the same way as the Bible. You commented about the whole issue of, well, where's the science in the Bible? Where in the world would the Bible even comment about something that could be falsified? What are the evidences for God? And then finally, this issue of the Israeli company that attempted to use an Old Testament passage dealing with the tribe of Dan to find crude oil. And so let me go ahead and start with the Israeli example you gave and point out the error that these fellows made. If they had read some more of my writings from back in the 80s, they would have seen the error of their ways, but I'll point it out in this way. In the Old Testament, it has an obscure reference to there being possible crude oil near the historical area of the tribe of Dan. Well, if you do use seismic, which is the standard way of looking for anticlines and synclines in the rock record, if you use that, you can determine in the subsurface, and I'll use this cloth here as an example.
10 seconds, David.
Here's an example of an anticline. Here's an example of a syncline. It turns out that Israeli company simply made a mistake. They should have started with seismic and not started with this obscure reference in the Old Testament.
Thank you, David. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with that. You shouldn't use creationism to try and find oil at all. That shouldn't be used at all. You should be using the techniques that are based upon, sort of modern geological mainstream science. You sort of said that you dismissed the Quran, which is weird. That why you brought it up, and if it's not a scientific book and you dismiss it, then why is it brought up at all? Because we're looking for scientific evidence, not just sort of, well, this account agrees with me. It's certainly not scientific. You sort of said, what's the falsification of the Bible? I guess I didn't get that. What would falsify the Bible would be my question back to you, because you didn't actually say anything. You just sort of said, well, we'd look at it. Sure. What is it? What would falsify the Bible? The sort of Israeli example, yeah, so this is more, and I do note that if they'd talk to you, sure, but you were trained in sort of old Earth geology first, I would imagine. You weren't trained in young Earth geology. So the knowledge that you would have that would apply to doing this survey first would come from old Earth geology. There's a couple of things I do want to sort of, you did a sort of in your rebuttal, sort of the whole idea of judicial bias. I think that's just a conspiracy theory. I don't think it's had anything to do with it. If you want to talk about what Judge Overton ruled and why his rulings would be wrong applied to science, I'm happy to do so. But my main point is those 5 criteria he outlined, I see them as very necessary for something to be scientific. And as I said, creationism doesn't tick a single box. I also want to point out that with Gentry's polonium halos that you're talking about, that Gentry wasn't a geologist, he was a nuclear physicist. The rocks that he got weren't from sort of ancient places. They'd had multiple sort of processes done on them that have been extensively reworked by natural formation. And his papers don't include things like uranium and thorium, which could have caused those halos just as easily. That's why his creationist things were rejected, not because of any kind of bias, but because he fundamentally missed certain parts. I'll save my time.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. David, back to you.
Okay, well, let me respond, starting with Gentry. What you say, Mark, is simply not true. If you look at this compilation of Gentry's papers, you will find that there's a paper that he did in 73, which he published in the peer review journal Nature. And here is the title of the paper: Ion Microprobe Confirmation of Lead Isotope Ratios and Search for Isomer Precursors in Polonium Radiohalos. And so when Gentry presented this argument at the Arkansas Creation Evolution trial, he said this. He said, one interpretation of these results is that the isomer has simply decayed to the point where it could not be detected in these experiments. These samples were from an early Precambrian pegmatite in Scandinavia. Well, see, you're wrong, Mark. He did tie in some geological localities. He didn't do what I would have liked him to do and produce a chart showing where each sample is from. Here's a reference to this one in Scandinavia. It is yet to be determined whether this information is consistent with the half-lives of the proposed isomers, which can be ascertained by determining the latest geological epoch in which such halos occur. And so it's simply not true, and it was not acknowledged by Dalrymple and Judge Overton himself in the Arkansas trial, that Gentry did reference certain localities. As a matter of fact, it would be of interest to the audience. David. It'd be of interest to the audience that Gentry's book, Creation's Tiny Mystery, is a reference to Dalrymple's comment at the trial.
Mark, over to you.
Okay, so I never said he didn't include geological samples. I said that he wasn't a geologist, which is 100% true. And a lot of criticism has been his ability to accurately gather geological samples from, what he calls sort of primordial rocks that were not fact primordial rocks. In fact, I believe it was the noted geologist. He basically, his work was called silly by a number of other geologists that basically said that he completely fluffed his work. This whole idea of the, I mean, no one's sort of arguing that radio halos don't exist and polonium radio halos don't exist. What we're saying is you need scientific evidence to demonstrate that the cause of that is a God creating the universe. Like, nothing we've heard here has addressed the idea that a God created the universe. There was also things about these halos that Gentry couldn't account for. Sort of some of them were too large or some of them were too small. And he sort of said speeding up radioactive decay accounted for it. Well, that is not a novel testable prediction. You have to make the prediction before you know the details. So if he sort of said, hey, we should expect to see this and then found it, that would be one thing. But he did not. He found the halos and then attributed his worldview, his biblical worldview, to what caused them. That is the definition of an ad hoc explanation for something. It's accounting for the data. It's not predicting it. I'll save my time.
David, go ahead.
in Gentry's work, which is published in this book I am referencing here, he acknowledges that there are secondary halos that come from a uranium parent that are found in coalified wood, that are still found in coalified wood in roll front uranium deposits in your home country of Australia. These have been acknowledged by Andrew Snelling, these halos that have been found there. And these are not ad hoc. Gentry took a look at these secondary halos, and he obtained samples, did an analysis of them, and the lead-lead ratios that he found in polonium halos in pegmatites and granites simply did not match the ratios that he found in the secondary halos. So he was doing science by the very definition that you gave earlier on in our debate, in which he was looking at a bit of data that he was unaware of at first, and that is these halos that are found in coalified wood in the Western United States and also in Australia. And he wasn't providing an ad hoc explanation, but rather he was doing science in the very outline that Overton falsely accused him of in the debate there in Arkansas, and that you have outlined as the way science proceeds. He looked at the data and found a separate data set. I want to use the rest of my time to address a comment that you had made earlier.
10 seconds.
About how the accounts in Genesis can't be viewed as historical documents. We'll return to that.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so the whole idea, and Andrew Snelling, I know that he's worked with Gendry, so it's hardly surprising there'll be an agreement. I believe they have a relationship at Creation Ministry, so it's that's not surprising. If you do speed up the acceleration of those isotopes, you do have the heat problem, which I believe you have claimed on certain occasions to have solved, kind of thing, which I'd love to see that equation so the physicists can have a look at it and see if it in fact a solution or whether it is just sort of an ad hoc explanation. None of it sort of addresses the problems that other geologists have had with these things, like that it could have been uranium or could have been thorium. It doesn't address that in the slightest. The whole thing that his samples were not from primordial rocks, they were actually from sort of massively reworked rocks. And the fact that sort of his conclusions were, they were tentative in that paper that you said that it was inconclusive, is what he said. And the sort of, there's no connection that Gentry made with these isotopes and a young Earth. He just said that this doesn't work, but his own process didn't work because he did have things that fell outside his range of what it was. And the problem is that isn't a prediction. It would be a prediction if he said, hey, if the Earth is old, we shouldn't see these radio halos. And he went and found them. That's not what he did. Like, the first thing you said is he looked at these things first. Yes, he had the evidence first and then explained what caused them. So I'm not sure if you understand what an ad hoc explanation is, but that is sort of the definition. You see something and then you say, hey, here is the explanation for it. That isn't a novel testable prediction. A novel testable prediction is when we say, hey, there is something that we don't understand. Here is what I should see if my hypothesis is true, and then go and find it.
Very well. Let me respond to that. In Gentry's paper, 5 April 74, this paper in Science called Radio Halos in a Radio Chronological and Cosmological Perspective, The last paragraph in the paper contradicts what you're saying, Mark, and let me read it here. The X-ray data in figure 3C are unambiguous and should remove any doubt that previously reported lead 206-207 ratios are actually lead isotope ratios, and in fact represent a new type of lead derived specifically from polonium alpha decay. In summary, results of ring structure studies, mass spec, electron-induced X-ray fluorescence, these sound like scientific techniques to me, present a compelling case for the independent existence of polonium halos. The question is, can they be explained by presently accepted cosmological and geological concepts relating to the origin and development of the Earth? And so he didn't start with that comment, Mark, as an ad hoc comment. He worked through this whole business of lead 206-207 ratios. Seems to me like he was doing science the way science should be done. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think that's sort of, that is an odd ad hoc. I'm not sure if you still don't understand what an ad hoc explanation is. Like, it's sort of saying, hey, after the fact, sort of this is what caused it. But as it said, can they be explained by old Earth? According to the other geologists, yes, they can be explained by old Earth methodology. And sort of, I want to point out that that's also a book which isn't peer reviewed and isn't checked in any way for factual accuracy. Anybody can write a book. It is his papers that I'm more interested in, because on his papers he takes a very tentative view, and he has been harshly criticized by other geologists for his methodology in this case. As you said, it would have been nice for him to record sort of all his geological sort of information, but he didn't. That's the problem. That is bad methodology, because we can't test and repeat to see if we find the same things he does. And the other geologists that have extensively worked on radio halos criticize him that the rocks that he got were not the rocks that he claimed. So there is a problem with credibility here. And just having a book that somebody wrote does not improve your credibility in science. It is having those things tested by other people. Repeatability is what we're after, not just, hey, there's and I might add as well, I'm sorry, David, I got to reinforce this again. Even if, just say the old Earth thing was completely, debunked it completely, which I don't think it is. I think a couple of geologist friends would have a major bone to pick with me. But just say it doesn't get you to a God creating the universe. You've got to show a God creating the universe. And I haven't heard anything like that. All I've heard is, and like I pointed out in my thing, disproving one explanation doesn't make yours correct. You've got to show that your explanation is correct.
Okay, let me respond in a different way. We'll come back to the halos another time. I hope you can see this. This is a man-made heart valve, and it's called an Edwards Sapien 3 transcatheter heart valve. And this is a model that my cardiologist gave me of what this valve looks like. You insert it, let it open up, and it forms an operating valve. Now, Mark, I think you would agree that some biophysicists had to design and make this heart valve to be like a heart valve that's in the human heart. And so I would turn the argument on the head and say, does it not appear to you, my friend, that the heart that beats in us appears to have design characteristics? And if there's design characteristics, then that can be mimicked in artificial heart valves. Does this not present an argument for a first cause, a creator, someone who created the first heart? What do you think of that evidence for the existence of God?
I think that there's a number of explanations for how sort of the complexity and the adaptability of life can be, or how it fits what we need it to do. I do want to point out that there's some things that no designer would ever design, like the greater laryngeal nerve. It runs sort of down your throat, loops around your aorta and back up to the side of the neck. It goes about that far in your neck and takes a detour all the way around your heart to do it. No function there, just that's what it does. It's a terrible design. It gets even worse in giraffes, by the way, because it goes all the way down their neck, loops around their aorta, and all the way back up to their neck. So the idea that humans are designed in some capacity, I think is very... I don't think it's a very good argument, because there's some design choices that nothing in their right mind would design. Like, for instance, your intake and outtake for air regulation, or your air breathing is the same. It's the same port. No serious designer would do that. It also takes in food, which causes you to choke occasionally, and people have died from it. That's a terrible design. I don't think that's design. And when you look at organisms, you really see a bottom up kind of stuff. Like so there's top down and bottom up systems. Are you familiar with those, David?
Yeah, and I finish your point, and I want to bring in a counter argument, please.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll wrap it up there. I'll just say that I don't think design is a very good argument, because it doesn't seem designed to me.
Our youngest daughter holds a master's degree and professional credentials as a speech pathologist. And she has studied the anatomy of this kind of odd-looking anatomy that seems to be poorly designed. And what my daughter has taught, I wish she were here to help me with this, but what she has commented to me in the past about is, Dad, as you talk to evolutionists, that is not a good argument, because the way that runs in the face and down and up actually provides a anatomical benefit. Furthermore, I have talked to her about my own problem, about choking sometimes and getting what's called an esophageal spasm. And I've asked her, could God have designed the esophagus and could God have designed the esophagus in a different way that would have minimized the choking? And she says, well, if you look at this from a creation standpoint, the modern humans are the result of a genetic burden that go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, the fall. And so you've got 6,000 years of genetic burden there. But even if you didn't have that genetic burden, the fact that the flap ordinarily, when I pick up my bottle of water and I take a sip, the design of my throat is such that this goes down in my stomach. I don't aspirate it. Now, do I occasionally aspirate this? Yeah, I do. And that's because I don't follow my daughter's guidance when it comes to the speech pathology and the anatomy of things. And so I think your critique of that particular part of what you might call an esophageal spasm is inappropriate. That part of our throat is actually quite well designed. If not, all three of us would have choked on something we've eaten in the last 24 hours.
I noticed that, not to sort of disparage your daughter, I'm not sure what a person who has speech pathology sort of has to do with sort of an anatomy. I'm not sure the connection there, but I assume that she's had some kind of biology in her college days or something.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So you didn't actually mention the anatomical benefit of the greater, the recurrent laryngeal nerve that runs down the neck, and I'd like to know what the anatomical benefit is, if you could be so kind. And choking sometimes, I'm sure that an all-powerful God could design anything he wants. I mean, we could have a blowhole like a dolphin if God felt so the desire. I don't see why a God would be limited by, hey, we've got to set it up in a certain way. And having sort of the same tube for eating and breathing is my design flaw that I pointed out, not the fact that we eat or drink in this way. There are animals with different systems for air intake and for food intake. So that is not something that God's incapable of, according to your own word. Hold on a sec. According to your own worldview. And you sort of gave the explanation that it's modern humans and we have a genetic burden since Adam and Eve. Well, I think, according to this debate, you've got to scientifically demonstrate that, not just assert it as the case. So, even if you can make the argument that we have some kind of genetic defect because of the Garden of Eden, I need to see that scientifically demonstrated, not just sort of said, hey, that's the reason.
Okay, let me divert now to vestigial organs.
Actually, I'm going to jump in real quick, gentlemen.
Yeah.
So, okay, firstly, a question Mark had was specifically, what is the anatomical benefit of the laryngeal nerve? If you want to answer that, David McQueen, but we did just hit the 25-minute mark, and I really want us to focus in now on the topic. I'm unsure if these design arguments are now focusing on vestigial organs. I'm not sure if that is fully dealing with young Earth creation.
I can see your argument. Let me go back to one of my arguments for young Earth, and that has to do with the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. I tripped over.
We're not going to answer what the laryngeal nerve benefit is. Should we just put that one aside, or?
Well, I'm
happy to discuss this if you want.
That we're getting off this. I'll just make a quick comment in defense of my daughter. She holds a master's in speech pathology and has indeed studied the anatomy. And the argument is simply not a good one. But let's go on to the age of the Earth now, and let me get down to my.
I just want to confirm that you're not going to tell us what the anatomical benefit of the recurrent laryngeal nerve is.
Let's follow Donnie's guidance.
David, if you'd like to answer that question, you can answer it real quick.
We can just say, hey, you don't know if you want. That's fine. I'm really interested in because I haven't heard this before.
Well, without going and getting an anatomy book, all I can say is that my daughter, who has an undergraduate and a master's and postgraduate certifications in speech pathology, understands the anatomy of this particular nerve. And there simply is no problem in design. It's a good design. So that would be my answer. But let me go to the argument on the radioactive decay argument. Not that, I'm sorry. The decay of the Earth's magnetic field is what I'm trying to get at here. Let me find a blank sheet of paper here where I can draw on it. There we go. Here we go. So answer this question then about the age of the Earth. Tom Barnes, years ago, graphed the magnetic moment of the Earth's magnetic field going back into the 1800s, and then others have brought his data. Barnes has now passed to his reward, but they brought it up to 2023. And this is the intensity, and that's time, obviously. And it really is the case that there is a exponential decay with time of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, when I studied under Rob Vandervoo at the University of Michigan, he was a guy who world-renowned expert in paleomagnetism and so forth. He said, well, McQueen, what you're overlooking is that you have a dynamo in the Earth's mantle and in the Earth's, outer core and mantle that recharges this magnetic field, and then it drops, it gets recharged, it drops. And when I would press Professor Vandervoo, maybe this is one of the reasons they didn't allow me to continue in my PhD program, because I would press these professors. Say it again.
20 seconds.
There is no evidence of the recharge of this. The Earth's magnetic field indicates, at best, 10,000 years age of the Earth.
Thank you, David. Mark, over to you.
Okay, so and nobody's doubting that the magnetic field drops. Everybody will acknowledge that, and it doesn't just drop. What we see is a reversal in sort of magnetostratigraphy. We see the orientation of the actual ferrous elements reverse in direction, so we can tell that the actual magnetic field reversed. What process? I'm not a geologist. I do admit that. I have talked to a few, but I'm not a geologist myself. That is part of the process of the dynamo theory, that it drops and drops and drops, reverses, and that actually kicks it back into a magnetic field. So none of that gets to the question of a god doing it. I don't know what sort of so maybe you can skip to the significance this has of a god creating the Earth.
Okay, let me respond to that, because I think you're missing, Mark, a fundamental point here. The fundamental point is, if you go to the Bible in Genesis 5, and you add up the years between the creation and the birth of Abraham, it's about 2,000 years. Bible archaeology shows that Abraham lived about 2000 BC, and now we come up to our modern times. We end up with about 6,000 years as a legitimate age of the Earth. What Tom Barnes' point is that the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, even though it doesn't give us Usher's 4004 BC, it shows that God set this in motion. It's run for about 10,000 years, which is the age of the Earth. And so the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, when you discount its regeneration, which I have some problems with, is consistent with a biblical view of the age of the Earth.
All right. As I've already said, the Bible is not a science book. The Bible also says that Abraham lived for 175 years. So how do we test to see if that is true? How do we apply that in science? Is there any kind of falsification we can do to test whether Abraham did live for 175 years? Science would tell us that people lived a shorter time in the past, and it's highly unlikely that people lived for that long. But you're making the claim that he did. So how do we falsify that scientifically? How do we do that?
Okay, Mark, this is the way we do it. Do you believe that archaeology is a legitimate modern science?
Soft science, but yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
A soft science, but yes, as opposed to the hard sciences.
A soft science. Well,
yes.
Give me another. Is like sociology? Is that a soft?
Yeah, sociology, things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Psychology.
Well, I would argue that. Let's see how to present this. 10 years ago, I was hired as a geologist to go on a series of digs in Israel. I got a chance to dig at the famous Qumran site where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. I got a chance to be a geologist on site at the excavation of a biblical town that in the Bible is called Ai, but it's actually in Hebrew simply pronounced I. The A is silent. And when I went with these archaeologists and I would identify a particular fossil, for example, that I would find near the Dead Sea, I was giving them a scientific perspective that they found very helpful. So perhaps your claim or your assertion that archaeology is a soft science in the same sense as sociology, which, by the way, I would agree that it's a soft science. I think there is archaeological evidence at different points in the Bible account to indicate when Abraham was born, and certainly we have ample evidence external of the Bible of when Jesus lived around the time of Herod and the other Roman emperors. So I think you're being too harsh on the issue of archaeology being a soft science.
Well, I mean, it depends on whether you're understanding what a soft science is. So the hard science are things like physics and IT and computing and things where there's definitive answers that sort of maths related, and there's sort of, one answer kind of thing. Like engineering, when there's formulas, there's one answer of how you do things. You may have different techniques, but if you're sort of calculating, forces, that there will be one sort of equation for forces. Those are hard sciences. With archaeology, a lot of it is soft science. It's a lot of interpretation of data, and that's
Mark,
why we call it a soft. Hold it, and that's why we call it a soft science. That's not to say that it isn't. It can provide valuable insights, but what you're not doing is saying that this archaeological evidence is evidence for any supernatural God creating anything. I mean, I'm prepared to say, hey, yeah, it could be evidence for a Jesus that lived, sure. And I'm not a mythicist. I don't say that necessarily Jesus is a myth. However, that doesn't get you to a God, and it doesn't get you to a young earth either. All it is a story. And what I asked you specifically was, how do we falsify the claim in the Bible that Abraham lived to 175 years? And you just completely ignored that question and didn't answer it. You just had a problem with what I called archaeology.
Let me give an answer.
Yep.
The writings of Hebrew scholars over the years, the rabbis that put together the Torah and the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Torah, these rabbis had no reason to see the lifespan of Abraham as supporting an old earth or a young earth. Why? Because in Orthodox Judaism, I've got a buddy that is a Orthodox Jew, and he's always giving his children's birthdays in relation to a 6,000-year-old earth. Now, he's a Hasidic Jew, mind you. He's very Orthodox. So in Judaism, It's simply accepted that the earth is young. And so when the rabbis try to fit Abraham into a picture, the Orthodox rabbis don't have any problem with Adam living over 900 years. They don't have any real problem with Methuselah dying the year that the flood began at 969 years old. And so within Orthodox Judaism, the problem that you're posing is a non-problem.
Okay, David, thank you very much. Mark, we're going to give you the last word because David, if I remember correctly, you started the discussion. So Mark, we'll give you the final word. Go ahead. Feel free to respond.
Yeah, so writings of Hebrew scholars like the Talmud and Torah, we can then sort of say, how do we falsify them? So the chain goes ever onwards. And sort of, if rabbis had no reason to, sort of change the lifespan of Abraham, depending on whether old or new earth, that doesn't say whether it's actually true or not. It could just be that those are the stories that were handed down. I'm not saying there was any intentional deception either. It could just be that, hey, it was a great person. He lived a long time. Maybe he lived to 80, which was unusual in those days. And maybe that was blown out of proportion. Maybe it turned into 100. Maybe it turned into 125. And I'm not saying that they have to. I still don't get how that relates to whether we tell whether that is the actual truth or not, because people have said it. We can't assess their claims. And so the question was, here's the question: how do we falsify it? How do we make sure that it is the truth by trying to falsify that, which is important in science? And don't get me wrong, you can believe that if you want, and you can believe it on sort of the Talmud and the Torah. I get that. But what we're talking about is scientific evidence. And so if you can't falsify something, it is not scientific evidence. And so, sort of rabbis having no problem with it doesn't get you to falsifying anything. All it says is that these people believed it, which people believing something is not scientific evidence.
Okay, gentlemen, that is roughly 40 minutes for the discussion. Great job to the both of you. We've also got some great audience questions. But before we get to those questions, we do have 5-minute closing statements. And so this will be a way for us to wrap up our final thoughts and points and address anything that we feel may have been left hanging. Okay, David McQueen, since you're in the affirmative tonight, the question: is there scientific evidence for young Earth creation? You get the first 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
That's not the debate.
Is there scientific
evidence for creationism?
Scientific evidence for young Earth creationism? What's the debate title?
Oh, okay. I thought it was creationism. Okay.
No, it's a scientific evidence for young Earth. Right, Donnie?
Young Earth creation.
Young Earth creation, okay. May I begin my 5 minutes now?
Yes, David, you get the 5 minutes. And so whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, good. My argument revolves around several scientific issues that I think bear on this issue. We've talked about Gentry's halos. We've talked about Tom Bard's work on the decay of the Earth's magnetic field within a 10,000 year framework. We've talked about my own research as a geologist, dealing with the chemistry of crude oil, for example, and how that argues for a young Earth. Let's go to the book of 2 Peter in the New Testament, and let's look at a evaluation from the first century of the way that we can think about this problem of is the Earth old or young? In 2 Peter chapter 3, the apostle says this. This is 2 Peter 3:1. This is my second letter to you, dear friends, and in both of them I've tried to stimulate your wholesome thinking and refresh your memory. This is a paraphrase. I want you to remember that what the holy prophets said long ago and what our Lord and Savior commanded through the apostles. I want to remind you that in the last days, scoffers will come, mocking the truth and following their own desires. They will say, what happened to the promise that Jesus is coming again? From before the times of our ancestors, everything has remained the same since the world was first created. I would accuse Mark of being a uniformitarian in that way. And then notice verse 5. They deliberately forgot that God made the heavens long ago by the word of his command, and he brought the earth out of the water and surrounded it with water. Then he used water to destroy the ancient world with a mighty flood. And by the same word, he's prepared judgment. Then he goes down and says this. But you must not forget this one thing, dear friends. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. The Lord isn't slow about fulfilling his promise. Now, the Apostle Peter was an educated man in the Greek language, certainly in Aramaic and in Hebrew. He had access to words which would have communicated a 100,000-year-old earth, a million-year-old earth. He could have said a day is like 1,000,000 years to the Lord, or a million years is like a day to God. Why did he choose the unit 1,000? Well, he chose that because he knew from what he had been taught that it was about 2,000 years to Abraham and about 2,000 years from Abraham to the creation. So he had a sense that where he stood in time could be divisible into units of thousands. If the earth truly was old, Mark, would he not have said millions? But he said thousands as the divisible unit of a 6,000-year-old earth, a young earth. Thank you, Donnie.
Okay, David McQueen, thank you very much for the 5-minute closing statement. Let me restart the timer. And Mark, whenever you're ready, you also have 5 minutes. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay, so the whole idea of this debate, it was scientific evidence, not just claims, not just assertions, not just what a book says, but scientific evidence. The problem is that this evidence, and you can believe whatever on the evidence that you have. I don't have a problem with that. That's a different debate. That they're not scientific evidence, that it's not novel testable predictions. It's not testable at all. It's not tested at all to see if these claims are true. And when we ask, how can it be tested or falsified? David has no answer. He doesn't know. There's no answer to be had. When you ask how it can be falsified, anything in the Bible can be falsified. There's no answer to be had. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't things in the Bible that are true. Obviously, the places are true and the people might be true. But it's the claims made off of it and the origins made off of it that isn't falsifiable. And therefore, it is not science. It could be reasons to believe, but not scientific evidence. And not all evidence is scientific. You can have anecdotal evidence. You can have all kinds of different evidence. You can have circumstantial evidence. You can have there's lots of different evidence. It's just not scientific evidence. David couldn't back up his claims with any scientific evidence whatsoever. Not for a young Earth creationism. He only sort of brought up things that were problems with our own model, and that's not evidence for. As I pointed out, you have to provide evidence for your claim, not evidence against anything else. And doing that is just sort of shifting the burden of proof. The whole polonium halo thing, there's been vast criticisms of that by geologists, because Gendry was not a geologist, and so his methodology was flawed. He did not take into account all these other factors. He really does not have the degree to be able to publish as a geologist because he is a physicist. And he can publish as a physicist, that's fine. But, geologists do have problems with what he did. And there was the multiple court hearings that basically showed that creationism is not a science at all. So yeah, I think that the burden has been absolutely failed here. There's been no presentation of scientific evidence for the claims whatsoever, and just sort of pointing to what a book says that's unfalsifiable is not scientific evidence. It's just another claim. Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for those closing statements. We're now going to move into roughly 25 minutes worth of audience questions. And so, as we usually do here, it's not your first rodeo here on Standing for Truth, David and Mark, but just to kind of remind you, whoever the question's for, we'll give them the last word. Let's say between 1 and 2 minutes to answer each question, and we'll kind of go from there. All right, here we go. We'll
Thank you,
start
Donnie.
off. No problem. My pleasure. Okay, here we go. First question comes in from Taylor K. Thank you very much, Taylor. Question for Mark. If carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, why does it still exist today?
Well, it's not 5,700 and it's not 5,700 like I said in the question, but yeah, it's roughly 57,000 something. Look, it's because other stuff decays into carbon. Is a chain of decay, is how it works. So you don't have just carbon-14, and then when it's gone, it's gone. There's other things that decay into that element.
Thanks, Mark. David, floor is yours.
Carbon-14 has a demonstrated half-life of about 6,000 years. In my training, archaeologists are hesitant to use carbon-14 past about 50,000 years ago. By the way, Mark, so Gentry couldn't comment because his training was in physics? Does that mean that since Charles Darwin's degree was theology, he wasn't allowed to comment on the origin of species and natural selection? Thank you, Donnie.
Thank you, David. Mark, floor is yours for the final word.
Yeah, so and as I said, there's a decay chain, so I've explained that. As to your side, yes, he could comment, absolutely could comment. But if actual geologists start to bring up problems with his methodology that he cannot contradict and he cannot address, then there's some problems there. Plus, in Darwin's day, nobody was a biologist, and the degrees were different than we have today. So, he was a natural philosopher and theologist. He couldn't go get a, degree in sort of biology because it didn't kind of exist at that point.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Okay. Next question comes in from Travolt. Question for Mark. If the Big Bang is true, why do we not find more thorium than uranium in the universe? Uranium decays into thorium, which then decays slower than uranium. As I'm reading through the question, not completely on the topic of young Earth creation, but it's up to you, Mark, if you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I thought thorium was more abundant than uranium. It's certainly more abundant on Earth. That's not in question. I mean, David can probably back me up on that one. So I'm not sure. In the universe, I'm not sure about that. I'm not a cosmologist, but I think that thorium's more abundant. It may be because uranium, the conventional model, I'm not sure if David would agree with this, but uranium is caused by supernova reactions, where sort of it produces heavy metals. So, but I'm not sure that question's well formed because of the assumption that it makes.
I would prefer to yield on that and go to the next question, please, Donnie.
Would you agree, David, that there's more thorium than uranium? At
Well,
least on Earth?
I would think that since uranium decays into thorium in the ordinary decay chain, there would be initially more uranium and then thorium. But again, I'd rather go to another question.
Okay, question. But Mark, if you're going to say something, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that answers my question, which is, I mean, currently in the world, what is more abundant, thorium or uranium? It was the question. I'm not sure I really mind about initial conditions. It doesn't really enter into it.
I don't know your answer. I don't know how to answer you, Mark. Let's go on to the next question.
Why? It's a simple question. What's more abundant in the Earth, thorium or uranium? I mean,
we have less than
right?
15 minutes left. I don't want to look it up. Let's go to the next question.
You don't know?
Oh, no, I don't have it memorized. No.
Okay, gentlemen, if you're good to move on, here we go. Question from T-Rock. Question for Professor McQueen. Would you expect that the heat of the Earth's core should destroy the Earth's magnetic field over time by de-aligning the field between particles?
Well, let me respond to that. Since creation, there has been heat radiating from the Earth's core. No question that is true. The effect of that heat on the Earth's magnetic field needs to be addressed in this way. Let me get a prop here to do it. Here is Mark's magic wand of evolution. Let's touch the frog and turn him into.
Oh, that's another. I'd be happy to have that debate as well, David. Absolutely.
Let's go on here. Imagine this to be the Earth's axis. This is the axis of the Earth. It has been demonstrated that there is a magnetic field that rotates around the Earth according to the right-hand rule. I have taught high school and college physics, and the right-hand rule says that if there's an electric current going equatorially, it will create a magnetic field perpendicular to it. And so the rotation, I'm sorry, let me gather my thoughts here. Would you expect that the heat would destroy the Earth's magnetic field over time by de-aligning the field between particles? I think that this chart by Tom Barnes, I finally found it here. The magnetic moment is measured in ampere meters times 10 to the 22nd. And so it's gone from 8.6 to 7.8 from 1835 till now. This, I think, is objective scientific evidence of a decay of the Earth's magnetic field. And if you view the half-life of that decay as 1,400 years, it puts an upper limit on the age of the Earth. Why? Because if you keep going back in stronger fields, it would melt the Earth. Thank you, Donnie.
Thank you, David. Mark, floor is yours.
Yeah, I know this one after talking with T-Rock. So what you're talking about is ferrous magnets, not the ferromagnetic force, not electromagnets. Because of the dynamo effect, it's electromagnetic. It doesn't get destroyed by heat, so that isn't true. That graph of McQueen's doesn't also address the reversal of the magnetic field that we can see through observing the ferrous particles within rocks. It's kind of weird that sort of Professor McQueen doesn't know about this stuff. But yeah, what you're describing is a ferromagnetics, not electromagnetics. So important to differentiate the two.
Okay, thank you, Mark. David, question was for you. You get the last word.
The right-hand rule in physics does not simply apply to ferromagnetic conductors. If you have a copper wire that we rig up going around a vertical ferrous rod, high school physics here, if you run that current through a copper wire, it's still going to produce a magnetic field perpendicular to the direction of the current's movement. Okay, Donnie, back to you.
Okay, next question comes in. It's in the form of a super chat. Question from Sunflower for Mark Reid. And so Sunflower says or asks, we'll see here, your Blarney stone may not fit the criteria of the Christian God, but it fits criteria of a generic God. So the Blarney stone would just be God. Okay, so more of a statement, and therefore, Mark, however you'd like to respond, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And I want to give a big shout out to Sunflower. I do owe Sunflower an email as well, so I do apologize, mate. I'll get to that, but it's good to see you. Hope you're well. So the Blarney Stone has no mind and so no agency, and that's the thing that differentiates it from a god. So in order to be a god under most philosophical, or nearly all philosophical definitions, you have to be an agent. You have to have some kind of imposition of will. As a object rather than an agent, a stone would not have that imposition of will. So that is why the stone is not a god. It's just a stone, and it's magic.
Okay, appreciate it, Mark. And thank you again, Sunflower, for the super chat. David, any thoughts?
Oh, yeah. My wife and I both are Clan MacDonald. We've traveled to Scotland over the years to find our ancestral home, and we view the Irish as our cousins. And we're aware that there is a Blarney stone in Ireland that can be kissed, I guess. And the very idea that you would use this rock as a example. Of course, the rock is not. It's not the creator. It's not human. It's not sentient. It's not omniscient. And so, as a true Scot of Clan MacDonald, I just have to say that.
All right, appreciate it, David. Mark, question was for you. You can have the last word.
Yeah, I as you probably guessed from my last name, I'm part Scottish as well. That's where my family came to Australia.
Oh, very
from.
good.
So,
very
yeah,
good.
Clan Reid. It just means red, basically. So presumably my ancestors had red hair at some point. That's interesting. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and I'm not referring to the literal. All it is a device, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody. I'm not trying to sort of mock anybody by it. It's just to point out that when you're talking about dichotomies in logic. All that needs to happen to prove a dichotomy false is just point out some other alternative. That's all. And so that is just another alternative. I don't believe it is the cause of the universe. I don't believe in it at all. But it's just to demonstrate how we think logically about these things. How we say, well, what's a true dichotomy where you have no option but to accept the other thing if one is proven wrong. Like, it's the same as having two people in a room, one of them must have committed the crime. And, having multiple people in the room and saying, well, because you didn't commit the crime, it must have been this other guy. If there's another option, that can't deductively be the case. And that's all it is to do. It's just to point out that sort of, that school of thought about dichotomies.
Mark, you're a more righteous man than I am. I freely make fun of the Irish. Let's go on.
All right, David, Mark, appreciate it. Okay, here we go. Creationist crybaby question for David. And so the question is, the North American mid-continent outcrops exhibit at least 55 cycles of marine inundation and withdrawal. In brackets, marine ecologies interleaved with terrestrial ecologies. Please explain.
Okay. Let's see what prop here I can use for this. If you go to the North American mid-continent, if you went to school at University of Michigan, we can drop down almost by the longitude to the mid part of Louisiana. If you go up there, it is certainly true that there are multiple outcrops in mid-continent. He says 55 cycles. I'll go ahead and give him that. Marine inundation and withdrawal. Marine ecologies interleave with terrestrial ecologies. This gets into the interpretation of certain rock units as being lacustrine, littoral, and so forth. I don't want to deal with that. But I will say that the flood model that has vast amounts of water moving in cycles over the whole world is adequate to explain, and I'll even give him the 55 cycles of marine inundation over a 1 year period. Thank you, Crybaby.
Okay, thank you, David. Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's a number of these sort of problems with young Earth creationism sort of outlined. There's problems with the tuff, which is basically a volcanic ash that only becomes tough if it's not inundated. So the sort of catastrophism fails when it comes to tuff because it can't be wet or else it forms into a shale. And there's sort of the slope crystallization of limestone. There's the growth of salt domes. There's tons of evidence against old Earth creationism. But at the moment, I'm not sort of in a I don't have to demonstrate. There's tons of evidence against young Earth creationism, but I don't have to demonstrate young Earth creationism is false in this one. Really, I'm just addressing David's sort of points on old Earth creationism. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mark. David, you can have the last word. Question was for you.
Well, let me try to give Mark a hard pill to swallow here. So this is a pretty big pill.
Maybe a suppository.
Are you saying, Mark, that there is no evidence worldwide of the catastrophic deposition of any sedimentary unit?
Do you mind if I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. We see a lot of catastrophism, like, for instance, the Missoula floodplains, where it creates very, very distinct geological features, like the sort of boulders being rolled and all of this kind of stuff. We don't see that worldwide. That's the problem.
I noticed, Mark and Donnie, that we're down to our last minute of the 2 hours. And I'd like to spend my time thanking Mark truly.
Well, David, let me jump in. I am looking at the timer. We hit about the 17-minute mark, and so we still do have enough time to get through these last few questions.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood the time. I apologize.
Well, I'll take the thanks anyway, and thank you, David. I'll thank you in return, but I'll take it if you're willing to offer it up ahead of time, sure. But yeah, it's been great to talk to you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Donnie. I misread my timer. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. You guys have both been very cordial, very professional. It's been a great exchange. And so a thank you ahead of time is not an issue. That's for sure. So you're both very polite. I appreciate it. Okay, next question comes in from Andrew Cumming. And I will say to the audience, thank you for all the feedback, the engagement, and questions. Lots of on-topic questions tonight. So Andrew Cumming has a question for David. Since you hold to the YEC view, how do you explain seasonal varves? In brackets, he puts some spanning thousands to millions of years in a young Earth? Question mark.
Okay, Andrew, I appreciate that. Mark lives in Western Australia, on the other end of the continent, which is thousands of miles away. My colleagues, I should say, plural, that are in orbit around John Mackay have done a number of very interesting sand model experiments, which indicate that what would be interpreted as seasonal varves, very fine layers in these experiments that John Mackay and others have done, are not seasonal at all, but rather can be explained within a young Earth view. Now, let me slightly switch gears here to something that I have studied in some detail, and those are the varves in ice cores from especially Greenland. There's some data also from Antarctica, but I'll use the the varves in Iceland, the varves in Greenland as an example to show how this fits in. Mark has made a very good point throughout our discussion to say, well, McQueen, where's the data? Where's the actual data? How can we tell the truth of what you're saying there? Well, if we were to find a 1955 Chevy in a Hawaii lava flow, buried in it, we would know that that lava flow had to have occurred after the manufacture of that car. So it was after 1955. In Greenland, in some of these very deep borings, they have found a World War II aircraft. And yet they count the varves as they go down. And to use this argument here from Andrew, you would assume that the World War II occurred 100,000 years ago. My dad fought in World War II. I know what he was doing 79 years ago. Can you see the argument, Andrew? The varves don't necessarily count year for year, biannual, and so forth. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, David. Mark, floor is yours.
Yeah, there are other ways to form varves. We're talking about seasonal varves here, David, ones that form over the year. So we can sort of point to the Green River Formation, for instance, that has sort of 600 million varves, and we know that it formed annually because it has all the distinctive marks. I can also point to Lake Seetsugu, which is in Japan, and it has a 60,000-year varve chronology. And we know it's seasonal, we know it's yearly, because it's still forming today. So that's 60,000 years, which is way over your estimate of 6,000. And it still forms today. So we know that's how it is forming. We know it's not any other method. The thing that you mentioned was the Lost Squadron. Now, the Lost Squadron, yes, they sort of say, hey, it's this far down. But in actual fact, the Lost Squadron is an active glacier region, not a stable glacier region. So it's constantly melting and resetting, melting and resetting. So we don't take ice core samples and measure dates from an active glacial region because it is so subject to change. We take ice core samples to measure age from stable glacier regions because it doesn't melt and then reset. And that is how those squadrons got down there. It's because it's in an active glacier, one that is going back and forth. So the Lost Squadron is a really obvious example of where you're taking the data from the wrong place.
Thank you, Mark. David, a question was for you. You can have the last word.
Let's go back to the Green River Formation in the western United States. I have samples in my collection and actually have visited the locality in my geologic experience. And it is interesting that there are very thin layers there. But what do those layers contain, Brother Mark? They contain fish fossils, some of which are captured in the midst of giving birth, and the fish are consuming each other. It looks like an evidence of catastrophic deposition to me, irregardless of the number of seasonal varves, so-called.
Okay, thank you, David, for that final word. Next question comes in from Uncensored Pilgrims. Paul Price, thank you very much. And as you know, Mark, of course, you and Paul had an excellent formal debate on evidence for God just a couple months back. So his question for you is, what in theory would conceivably count as scientific evidence for creationism?
Yeah, hi, Paul. Good to hear from you. So I sort of went through this already. So we're talking about novel testable predictions. We're talking about falsifiability, the ability to falsify things. Now, if you sort of say, well, nothing's falsifiable, I mean, that's fine, but that would mean that nothing in creationism is actually science. And then that's, you know, I don't see how that's the problem of science. It has a number of sort of strict regulations of what we need it to do to be science. One of those things is falsifiability. And I'm sorry, that's just how science works. So If you want to go and say, well, I believe this upon, all of the other evidence, the anecdotal evidence and the historical evidence, if you will, the biblical evidence, other evidence, that's fine. It's just not scientific evidence. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. David, any thoughts?
Yes, I think uncensored pilgrim, plural, the evidence that I've presented tonight from Gentry's work, from, now again, I'm going to focus on evidence for creationism, young earth creationism. I think tonight I presented evidence from Tom Barnes' work, from Bob Gentry's work. Maybe I haven't been clear enough about my own research that deals with this. If you do a search of ICR acts and facts from the past, you'll find that I've written one article that deals with an evidence for the rapid formation of crude oil. And the evidence is based around a compound called a porphyrin, which is found in hemoglobin and chlorophyll. But it's also found in crude oil replaced by vanadium and nickel. I think that provides a geologic evidence for a young Earth, because these compounds simply break down as quick as whole blood does if you leave it after you donate it, just laying out on the counter. Thank you, Donnie.
Okay, thank you, David. Mark, you get the last word.
So the ICR, I mean, it's not a falsifiable thing either. They aren't sort of acknowledged in any scientific community as doing, a scientific foundation. I know that they do like to present themselves as such, but they're not acknowledged to be scientific anywhere in the world. It's sort of, and I want to point out that David was taught by people who did use the scientific method, and sort of, he's not sort of arguing of what the scientific methods are, and he hasn't once said, hey, science doesn't have to be falsified. I think we both sort of agree that is the case.
That is true.
I just don't know how you would falsify some of the claims, and that's not me trying to be mean or anything. I just don't know how you would falsify the claims made.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And we're coming down to our last two questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. So David and Mark, you're both doing a great job during this audience Q&A period. I appreciate it. Great timing as well on each question. So George Bond, question for Mark. George says, a new paper, I guess this is the title of it, The Cosmological Constant, has been described as the worst prediction in the history of physics. Okay, so probably not the title of the paper. It's proposed the red shift is an illusion. What now for billions of years? And any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think that the red shift is being described as an illusion at all. I think perhaps it is not, like, we don't have as accurate a handle on it as we thought we did. But that's what science does when it sort of it sort of finds something that is wrong about our models. We update them and we say, hey, what is the reason for this? That's why scientists get excited when they say, hey, we've got something wrong. We can find out what it is. The whole idea, because science has gotten something wrong, then we should throw out science and just go with the Bible. I think that's the mistake that I'm trying to point out tonight, that you need to get your own evidence for your own start of the universe, George. Not just say, hey, there's problems with your model, but get your own and explain how it works and suggest how it can be falsified. If you can't do that, I'm sorry, you're just not doing science.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any thoughts on that, David?
First, I'll say hello to my longtime friend, George, and then comment about this whole issue of red shift, blue shift, and the implications about the cosmological constant. My colleague in creation science, Russ Humphreys, has spent 40 years pondering this issue of what might be the worst prediction in the history of physics. And Russ Humphreys has pointed out that if you look at the actual data for the starlight problem in physics, for example, starlight problem in cosmology and astronomy, how can there be really a galaxy that we know is 1 light year away would make it longer than 6,000 years? I think that Russ Humphreys' argument that there is a level of confusion, I guess I'll use that word, in the whole idea of the expanding universe, redshift, blue shift. The secular astronomers, since they're seeking truth, and I believe the truth is found in young Earth, I'm not at all surprised that they would view the redshift as an illusion.
Thank you very much for the response, David. Mark, you get the last word. Question was for you.
Yeah, so Russ Humphreys, I've ran into this sort of claim before. He sort of proposes some kind of white hole theory that the universe came in from expanded out of a white hole less than 10,000 years ago. This whole thing is that he doesn't have any scientific evidence to back up these claims. All he is doing is making arguments trying to fit the biblical view to what we know in science. Like, even if we got the amount of redshift wrong, our model might be out by a certain amount, but you're not going to get back to the 6,000 to 10,000 years that you want. It's just not going to represent that. You have to make these ad hoc explanations like the universe came out of a white hole 10,000 years ago. That's fine. Now get the scientific evidence to demonstrate that, not just make the claim. And that's his problem. He can't get the evidence to demonstrate it.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that final word. And that wraps up the audience Q&A. And so again, I'll say great job, David and Mark, answering the questions to the audience. Tons of fantastic questions. I appreciate the engagement. And so great debate, David and Mark. Let's get some final words, final thoughts. David,
yeah, let me comment to Mark. I'd like to make a gift to you of the book I've written about. It's called The Mineral Book. It has to do with mineralogy, crystallography, that sort of thing. So if you could provide Donnie in the next few weeks your mailing address, I will mail you an inscribed autographed copy of my book as a way of saying thank you to you for today.
Okay. I'm kind of loath to give out my address over the internet, but okay.
No, you give it to Donnie. He can communicate it to me verbally. I don't want you to put your address out on the open web. No. I'm not going to give you my address.
Oh, good. Yeah. No, I wouldn't trust me either. No. I'm an atheist, right?
I don't trust you.
If it's autographed by David McQueen himself, keep that hand. That's going to be worth something one day. So
yeah, okay. Right, so it's worth at least an extra $1, even an Australian dollar.
Appreciate the generosity. Okay, David, thanks for the final words, final thoughts. And David, thank you for your time tonight for the debate. Mark Reid, over to you. Thank you as well for your time for this
Thanks, Donnie.
debate. Let's get some final words, final thoughts from you.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you, David. It was actually a really cool time. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for having me on, Donnie. It's all great. Actually, I was mentioning on the stream the other day, I got to say, and I mentioned it before, I might disagree with Donnie on all kinds of things. I disagree with David, but nobody can fault Donnie's professionalism. I just want to say that up front, like one of the most professional people I've ever interacted with on YouTube. So, I just want to give you a big congratulations on that, Donnie. I don't think that's, sort of said enough, but apart from that, I disagree on all other things except for superhero movies. That's apart from that.
As my friend George would say, I'm moving my cursor to leave the studio. Good night, my friends. Good night.
Okay,
Good
David
night.
and Mark, I appreciate those kind words. That means a lot. So that really does.
Thank you
And
very
yes,
much.
we do have that common interest in superhero movies, and so that's good. That counterbalances the disagreements over origins.
At least a
issues,
little
so.
bit. Sure. All right, Donnie. I get out of here as well.
Yeah,
David's left the building. Yeah.
I
All right.
guess
No
we're
worries.
closing it down. Okay,
Yeah.
Mark.